Hello, it's my pleasure to welcome you into The Light from Ocean Reef, a podcast aimed at shining the Bible's light on our daily lives. I'm Dan Meyer, chaplain in residence at the beautiful Ocean Reef community in Key Largo, Florida. Before coming here, I served as the lead pastor of a Chicago area megachurch and as host of an Emmy Award-winning television news magazine. I'm a graduate of Yale University and Princeton and Fuller seminaries, a husband and a dad, and someone like you, I imagine, who's always looking for practical wisdom to make the best of life. I hope this podcast gives you some of that. Today we're presenting a Bible study on the book of Nehemiah that I've called Builders of Eternity. I hope you'll get a lot from this session that will help you to live and lead more thoughtfully in the various spheres of your life. Let's join the program right now. Hello and welcome to part 12 of our study on the book of Nehemiah. I'm bringing this to you from my den at home, recognizing that we're no longer meeting in person, and I just thought it would be fun to continue the conversation and our study together. We're picking up the story of Nehemiah today in chapter 11, and you may find it helpful to have your scriptures open to that part of God's Word. As I think about the context for what we're going to talk about today, I strangely think of my basement at home. I remember it was one of the very best features of the house when we were shopping for real estate. This back part of our house was what's called an extra deep pour. They went really low in the earth and allowed nice high ceilings. It's the length of a bowling alley. It looked like it could accommodate birthday parties full of kids and crowds of teenagers someday, and a pool table and a ping pong table, maybe even an apartment for my mother-in-law. I don't know. It was just a great space. Now, however, you'd actually be lucky to get 3 kids and a dog down there at once. And the reason, as you can probably imagine, is that over time we have accumulated a massive amount of junk. In a metaphorical sense, I think it's often like that with our lives too, isn't it? We're people with cluttered basements and closets and overfilled schedules and agendas. We've got messy memories and minds and jam-packed social lives, overstocked volunteer lives at times. Just think about all of the areas of your life that are cluttered right now and maybe in need of some kind of spring cleaning. 2 of the greatest enemies to the progress of God's work in our lives are hurry and clutter. Hurry in the sense that we're no longer moving slowly enough to have a genuine relationship with God or with other people or maybe even with ourselves. And clutter becomes a major issue because we get so crowded on the inside of our lives that we're no longer able to discern and appreciate the particular values and the blessings and the people among the muchness that's always distracting us. So if we could only do some more regular spring cleaning in all areas of our life, we might be actually amazed at the new sense of hope and the fresh awareness of possibilities that might open up for us. Parenthetically, I'll just say that in the Christian tradition, the season of Lent was often a time when people sought to do that kind of spring cleaning for themselves. But the summertime can be a great time for that as well. It was the same way in ancient Jerusalem as it is for us. When Nehemiah first arrived there, the city looked even worse than my basement. It was a veritable disaster area, if you remember studies past. There were broken down buildings and burned up gates, tumbled down walls. There were clogged up wells and junk-filled alleyways. Only a handful of citizens were still remaining in the city, and they were wending their way through the rubble and the wreckage of what had once been one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Nehemiah, God's servant, could somehow still picture Jerusalem as it had once been and as it might yet be again. And I think there's a leadership lesson in that for all of us. Leaders refuse to allow present problems to eclipse their vision of more perfect possibilities. They hold fast to a vision. They take deliberate steps to try and bring that vision into being. And so one of the questions I want to invite you to think about today is, what would it look like for that cluttered area in your life, that most cluttered area that you might have thought about earlier? What would it be like if it was uncluttered and became truly available to God's good purposes again? This is why I think Jesus continued to encourage his followers to envision the kingdom. He so often talked about the importance of not dwelling on how bad things are, but picturing what things could become. It's why we hear the recurrent refrain in his teaching, and the kingdom of heaven is like, and the kingdom of God is like. He wanted to put in front of people a vision for what life could be that would draw them into the future. Well, when Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, it took a lot of imagination to see past the rubble-filled streets and all the gaunt faces of the few remaining inhabitants. But Nehemiah did see past those things. He managed to picture a city with high, strong walls and solid gates and ordered buildings and streets. He saw throngs of people once again engaging in commerce and fellowship and the worship of God. And when we meet him in chapter 11 of the story, amazingly, much of that envisioned dream has become a reality. Walls are standing once again, tall and formidable. Massive gates swing easily once again on great hinges to open up or to seal the city. Many of the public buildings and streets have been restored to their former glory. There's only one problem. The city could not truly come back to life until more people once again lived there. During the prosperous era of King Josiah, some 170 years earlier, prior to the invasion of the Babylonians in 586, the population of Jerusalem was at about 20,000 residents. By the time that Nehemiah got there in 445 BC, comparatively few people remained. Perhaps 5,000 people were left. For the same reason that few folks live in certain blighted sections of American cities, the buildings were just too broken down and the living conditions just too miserable for people to have stayed there. Now that the city has been rebuilt, however, the next major task that Nehemiah faces is the repopulation of Jerusalem. And that process is what we find described in chapter 11. I want to pick it up at verse 1. Now the leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring one out of every 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while the remaining 9 were to stay in their own towns. I think of the story of the church in Wheaton, Illinois, that commissioned a delegation of its members to leave behind the beautiful suburb that was their home and to move into the south side of Chicago, a much more difficult context, and to form there a Christian community, a church in a rundown neighborhood, and have a radiant influence on its renewal. It's a lovely vision, and I think of a particular couple I know, Ann and Wayne Gordon, who were part of that movement and who established the magnificent Lawndale Community Church that grew into a halfway house and a school and an amazing medical center and a clinic and so many other life-enhancing ministries. This is something of the vision that Nehemiah had. If he could just bring people back to enable to the city could truly flourish. So what is being described here in this text is essentially an organized effort, but it's also different from what I've just described in Chicago in a variety of ways. It began with a group of leaders, Nehemiah among them, who made the commitment to leave their rural homesteads in the regions surrounding Jerusalem and head back into the city. And the leadership lesson in this is that effective leaders lead less by giving orders than by setting a personal example. Now, you might think that people would have been just elbowing each other out, vying for a chance to live in Jerusalem again, called here in the text the Holy City. It needs to be said, however, that most people apparently did not want to follow the example of people like Nehemiah. We can guess at the reasons from what we know of the culture at that time. Non-Jews attached a stigma to Jerusalem residents. They often excluded them from trade because of their religious beliefs. Moving into a city, secondly, meant rebuilding one's home and reestablishing one's business, which was a major investment of time and of money. And thirdly, living in Jerusalem required stricter obedience to God's word because of greater social pressure and proximity to the life of the temple. Presumably, because there weren't enough volunteers to keep large sections of the city from being vacant, Nehemiah institutes the equivalent of a draft to select others for relocation. And this is what we're reading about in this story. Incidentally, population redistribution efforts from the countryside to urban centers like this were actually not at all uncommon in the ancient world. The Greeks even had a word for this process. It was synokismos. It's a great word for impressing your friends at parties, synokismos. The city of Tiberias on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee was populated in this manner by Herod Antipas in AD 18, in fact. In Jerusalem and in Judea, Nehemiah institutes a plan to get 1 in 10 people to relocate to the city. In a sense, it was a tithe toward God's holy city. Nehemiah's method is to start a lottery to determine who else will be asked to go. And lotteries were also common in Old Testament times as a means not of raising money or winning fortunes as they are in our time, but of selecting people for various tasks. The Israelites firmly believed that God would direct the outcome of such lotteries. As Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." Lotteries were done according to the venerable bingo method used in public lotteries today. Small stones or pieces of wood were put in a container. They were then shaken up, and then one of them was spilled out. And the person who got the largest or the smallest item was the chosen one. As the next verse makes clear, although a lottery was used to suggest candidates, in the end, some additional people caught the spirit and actually volunteered themselves to make the move, which is why we read in verse 2, "The people commended all the men who volunteered to live in Jerusalem." The key idea here is that those without the courage or the commitment to lead are wise to have the grace to encourage those who do. Have you ever felt that way when you volunteered for a leadership responsibility? Have you ever lived that way when somebody else was leading? It can be really hard to do. And the word commended here in verse 2 is literally the word for giving blessing. They blessed those who took on the hard task of making this move. I think this kind of support between people and their leaders is needed in our time. We're so quick to criticize those who are stepping out in front when maybe what we ought to be doing is commending and encouraging more of them. Well, the story continues in verse 3 by saying, "These are the provincial leaders who settled in Jerusalem. Now some Israelites, priests, Levites, temple servants, and descendants of Solomon's servants lived in the towns of Judah, each on his own property in the various towns, while other people from both Judah and Benjamin lived in Jerusalem." These verses are essentially succinctly summarizing the information that we're given in detail throughout the rest of this chapter. And the basic picture we get from verses 4 all the way through verse 36 is that some priests and Levites, including temple servants, lived in the surrounding towns and villages, and they commuted to Jerusalem when they served in the temple. Others, who were not civil or religious leaders, took up residence in Jerusalem. They were of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, we're told. So, all in all, about 3,044 men moved into Jerusalem, we're told. The descendants of various family heads who made the move included 468 laymen of the tribe of Judah. That's verses 4 through 6. 928 laymen of the tribe of Benjamin, verses 7 through 9. 1,192 priests, verses 10 through 14, 284 Levites, verses 15 through 18, 172 gatekeepers, verse 19. And according to 1 Chronicles 9 and verse 3, descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh, two other tribes, also lived in Jerusalem. Well, in addition to this basic census information, and this is a really fascinating historical snapshot of a population and its demographics at this time, but in addition to that, we're given a picture of the particular villages that were inhabited around Jerusalem in this period. We're given also a sketch of particular precincts within the city of Jerusalem that were occupied by particular groups. And we're also given a sense of the different clusters of people, priests or gatekeepers and so on, who were needed to keep a city like this going at this period in history. Let's be frank, however, this is hardly the sort of information that you're going to go away from this study today remembering or describing with excitement to your friends and neighbors or spouse. So really, what is the ultimate practical value of even studying this? Well, many years ago, the famed biblical commentator and pastor Matthew Henry penned these words that may help give us some insight. He wrote, "In all ages, men and women have preferred their own ease and advantage to the public good. Even the professors of religion too commonly seek their own." He's talking about pastors there. "And rather than the things of Christ. Few have had such attachment to holy things and holy places as to renounce pleasure for their sake. Yet surely our souls should delight to dwell where holy persons and opportunities of spiritual improvement most abound. If we have not this love for the city of our God and to everything that assists our communion with the Savior, how shall we be willing to depart hence from earth to that place, to be absent from the body, that we may be present with the Lord? To the carnal-minded, the fleshly-minded, the perfect holiness of the New Jerusalem would be still harder to bear than the holiness of God's church on earth. So writes Henry, let us seek first the favor of God and his glory. Let us study to be patient, contented, and useful in our several situations, and let us wait with cheerful hope for admission into the holy city of God. So it is that we meet this kind of holy ambition in those who were willing to make the sacrifice and move their lives towards the holy city. We go on to read from the descendants of Judah, Athaiah, son of Uzziah, the son of Zechariah, the son of Amariah, the son of Shephatiah, the son of Mahalalel, a descendant of Perez. And then in verse 5, and Messiah, son of Baruch, the son of Kol-Hoseh, the son of Hazaiah, the son of Adiah, the son of Jolarib, the son of Zechariah, a descendant of Shelah. The descendants of Perez, who lived in Jerusalem, totaled 468 able men. And then verse 7 and 8 and 9, and the rest of those verses, the long descriptions of names that are hard to pronounce, I'll leave you to read for yourselves. Because this, my friends, is a picture of a God who didn't just work in the abstract, but who summoned individuals with personal, unique stories to follow him, to lead their families in following him, to establish a witness to the life of God's kingdom in fresh places, and to bring about the revival and the restoration of a land that had once been a place of beauty and God's special blessing. This, dear ones, is God's call to you and me in our time as well. And the question is, will we listen to God's call when it requires that we forsake our pleasures? Will we respond to God's call when it takes us out of the comfortable places, the set and known pathways of our lives? Can we respond to the call of God when he invites us to change our whole way of seeing life, or seeing our neighbor, or seeing the use of our resources? This, friends, is ultimately the call of discipleship. And as we read in the New Testament, there always have been some who, when they heard the call of God, were willing to lay down their nets and follow the Lord. I pray you and I can be those kinds of people in our time. That's a wrap for today. I just want to say thanks for joining us for this study. If you know of others who might appreciate the chance to listen in to this sort of content, please encourage them to go to YouTube or Apple Podcasts and search for the Ocean Reef Chapel channel. Once again, I'm Dan Meyer, and I hope you'll come back soon to enjoy more of the light from Ocean Reef.